The Dharma, incomparably profound and exquisite, is rarely met with even in hundreds of thousands of billions of kalpas. We now can see it, hear it, accept it, and hold it. May we realize the true mind of the Tathagata. Today is the very first day of the very first session in this new year, 2024. And a week after this ends, we will have the second session of the new year in February. Back in the mid-1960s, in Kamakura, Japan, Roshi Kapleau was finishing up the writing of the Three Pillars of Zen. And in fact, it was Ralph Chapin, who lived in Rochester, New York, who was traveling to Japan on business and had somehow heard about this American that was writing a book on Zen and saw the printer's proofs in Roshi Kapleau's living room. And that started a long relationship. It was through Ralph that Roshi Kapleau was invited to teach in Rochester, New York. He did travel around. He was also invited to teach in Southern California by a group of Vietnamese women. And he did travel around the United States to figure out where he was going to start teaching Zen. And he settled on Rochester because it's got such crappy weather. It's terribly nasty in the winter. It has what's called lake effect snow, and there's constant freeze-thaw cycles, so that the sidewalks are deadly. They often get upheaved by the frost, and they're full of ice, covered by snow, and driving is not at all fun. It's kind of a challenging place, and it's gloomy. It's incredibly gloomy. And so he decided that that would be an optimal place to settle because it was so unpleasant outside that people would want to stay inside and go within themselves instead of entertaining themselves with outside adventures. And it has proved to be quite effective, actually. Of course, it also came with now the third generation of teachers at the Rochester Zen Center, and that also helps. So as he was writing the Three Pillars of Zen and training with Yasutani Roshi, he came upon a series of what shall we call them? Sort of commentaries on what it takes to do Zazen. And so he titled his book, The Three Pillars of Zazen, Three Pillars of Zen, meaning three pillars of meditation practice. And they are great doubt, great determination, and great faith. Great doubt is that sense we have that there is something more than we ordinarily are privy to, at least in the conscious level, and that it's worth getting back to, that there's something really, really important that we're missing somehow. We don't know what it is. We don't know how to reach it or really return to it, because it's more a sense for many people that it's something we need to return to, and that it is. Great determination is required, because if we don't persist, if we just keep stopping, starting, and maybe just don't bother, we won't ever return to that most precious beingness. is the best thing to call it, perhaps. And great faith, meaning a prerequisite is to have the faith that we can do it, that Zen practice provides us with the tools and the guidance that we can return to that, whatever it is, that nameless thing that beckons us from beyond. But I would add a fourth prerequisite, really, and that is great courage. Because everyone who comes to Zen practice comes as a result of some level of history that is painful. I have a good friend who came to Zen practice in the 1980s when her younger son committed suicide. There are people who come because they don't know what else to do, because life is so challenging that it's not possible to avoid that. There are some people who come because their life is pervaded by great anxiety. Albert Lowe was one of those. He was the person who was heading employment for the National Gas and Electric Company in Canada. And he did a lot of traveling as a result of that. And he found himself plagued with anxiety as he was traveling. And he finally retired early and came to practice with his wife at the Rochester Zen Center. He and his wife and the rest of us back then in the mid-70s were all living at the Rochester Zen Center and practicing Zazen together. There's something in the background of pretty much everyone, and some of those somethings can be very daunting. But if we are to become truly free, as is our potential, then the only recourse is to walk right into the pain, the anguish, the anxiety, the fear, the anger, whatever it is. And it's probably a mixture of all of those. And taste it so fully that it no longer provides a barrier. It's something that people are not really wanting to do. Over the years, there have been many different ways of working psychologically with these things. At one point in the 80s, it was very popular to do things like take a baseball bat and swat at a pillow periodically, particularly with regard to anger. You get angry, you grab that baseball bat and slam that pillow out of the universe. And then they began to realize that that didn't do anything to release the anger, although it seemed to. Instead, it reinforced it. And the same goes for other things. In my experience, in my understanding, in my observation, in my reading, and it's beginning to be well known in psychological circles, that the only way to work with these situations is to walk into the physical experience of the energy in our body. Now, it's ironic that Longchenpa, who was a 10th century Tibetan master, spoke of this long before psychology got it. Tuning in at the first hint of a challenging feeling. And normally when we have that beginning of a challenging feeling, we'll rush into our head, we'll maybe recognize that it is whatever it is, whatever the emotion is, or more likely, if it's one of the less acceptable emotions like anger, we'll turn it inward, and we won't even necessarily recognize that we feel that way. But neither spitting it out nor turning it inward is effective, and both can be damaging. If we turn it inward, we can cause ourselves all manner of illnesses, die early, and if we turn it outward, we cause grief and suffering. None of that is really what we want to do. So having the courage to walk in to these difficult sensations in our body before they turn into emotion, before they are acted out upon, and stay present with that jarring energy, whatever it feels like in our body. So present that, as Longchenpa wrote, it is freed in its own place without having to be gotten rid of. It's quite an amazing experience when you're able to make it happen. And it takes practice. It takes a lot of practice. Over and over again, working to really walk into that extremely uncomfortable, frightening, terrifying, whatever the feeling is. And there are many feelings that we can have come up that are not socially acceptable. And so that's a further challenge for us, is to dare to feel whatever it is, even though it is not really acceptable socially to feel it or to express it. It's essential. Relatively recently, in psychology history in the United States, Peter Levine has discovered that there's something that he calls the felt sense, which is the same thing that Longchenpa was talking about. And that if we go into the felt sense in our body, which is not the idea, not the picture, not the emotion, but the sensation of energy in our body, as fully as possible, if we can become one with it. And in Zen, becoming one with whatever is going on is an important aspect of life, because becoming one with what's happening, even if it's a difficult situation, is oddly releasing, fulfilling, and rewarding. So becoming one with that felt sense is something that he has come upon through working in his original field, which was wildlife biology. And noticing that when wild animals had a narrow miss of death, the deer is somehow able to outrun the mountain lion because it has more stamina and perhaps more speed as well. And then when it's clear that it's out of danger, it stops and it shakes. It visibly shakes. The rabbit that somehow freezes and thus is able to escape the hawk. When the hawk continues on its way, giving up on catching that rabbit, the rabbit shakes for a minute or two or three, visibly shaking. And what it is doing, it's allowing the energy that was caught in the moment. Because when animals are in danger, including human beings, great energy can come up. And even if we find ourselves unable to escape the situation, if we simply freeze, which is what many people will do, especially children, when they cannot escape, it gets locked in our body. And that inhibits our ability to move freely, emotionally, physically, mentally, and results in the continuation of great stress. It's not a healthy situation. And Peter recognized that if people could learn to, for example, shake, or at least mimic escape when they had narrowly missed a situation, or even when they had not. For example, if they'd been raped and there was no escape from that, then, and they survived the rape, then still that energy to escape is still locked in their body. And to be able to let it go by feeling it fully. And this can take some time because we don't want to feel it. It's kind of funny, many years ago at this point, we just bought a car and used all of our money. I had cashed in the insurance policy my parents had bought when I was a baby, and we had just enough money to buy the car and to insure it. And so 3 months later, we were going to drive that car out to Santa Fe. We were both at the Rochester Zen Center at the time, and have our 2-week staff break out in Santa Fe. But on the day before we were leaving, I went out to get some oranges. It was winter, it's February, and as I was about to turn left, I looked. There was nobody coming, and I started to turn left, and a large car flew over a hill, did not slow down, and hit the rear wheel on one side of the car, spun me around, slammed me into the back of another car that was perpendicular, waiting to go when the light turned. At the time, I was relatively new in practice. It was not even 1980 yet. And my response to the accident was to shake. I just sat there and trembled, and I thought, this is stupid. I'm a Zen student. I should not sit here and shake. I should be calm, cool, and collected. Well, actually, turns out shaking is really what I should have been doing, but I kept fighting it. And this is the normal response people have. Many, many years later, in the Zendo, through several sessions, I shook on the cushion. It was for a different reason. It was because I had locked in trauma in my body, narrowly having escaped what I thought was instant death, and I had frozen. I was a child. I was 9 years old at the time, 9 years old, and what was happening was the processing of that trauma was happening through my zazen, and I allowed it to shake. And it was that energy leaving my body, and there was a release and a relief when that happened. Just as Peter Levine discovered many years later. But when I finally got to a deeper level of that experience, and the full extent of the terror, the feeling of terror finally arose, it was extreme. When it first arose, I happened to be in a breathwork workship, psychology workshop, And I don't know how long it was going on, because by the time I sort of was able to be not finished with it, but far enough along that I wasn't continuing. Everybody else was finished with the workshop except me, and all the 4 therapists who were leading the workshop were all gathered around me. It first happened when you do those workshops, you're lying down. You have a partner who's sitting up and being there for you. And so I'm going along doing the proper breath work, and all of a sudden this terror starts to rise. Enormous terror. I sat up, and that terror went away. Lay back down, start breathing again. Here comes the terror again. Eventually, even when I sat up, it didn't stop. And I don't know what happened at that point, but somehow the others gathered around me, and they kept urging me to feel it. And I knew at that point in time that if I did, I wouldn't physically survive it, that it would be such a stress on my body that I'd have a heart attack or something. And so I stuffed it back in, but only temporarily. From then on, it was on the edge of the surface, and I had no choice but to deal with it. It took time. It took time. It took walking in to the physical energy of that terror, and if it got to be too much, backing out, and then again walking in, got too much, backed out, until eventually one day I didn't have to back out. I reached a point where it was far enough experienced that I could stay with it to a point where it literally dissolved, where it released, not went underground, but released, let go, dissolved. If I hadn't known before I started Zen practice that it was my only option to any kind of peaceful, happy life, any option to not staying in the pain and suffering that I'd come to Zen practice out of, I wouldn't have done it. And for anybody else who's in that position, I hope you also have reached an understanding within yourself, a deep understanding that there's no alternative but to walk in. Because there really isn't, other than a life filled with continuing misery. A few moments of maybe freedom from it, but then it comes back to haunt you in the middle of the night or whatever. So this is why I feel that that courage should be a 4th pillar of Zen practice. That perseverance needs to be bolstered by courage. Faith needs to be bolstered by courage. And with all 4 of those pillars supporting our practice, we can do what we instinctively sense we can, which is to become truly free. It's not instantaneous. It takes time. I've been working on this for 50 years. But I can say that I no longer have the terror. And I understand from the work I've done and how it feels now that it's so valuable to be able to do this work, and that for so long I didn't even know that the work had to be done. And therefore, there's an assumption that there's a lot more work to be done, and I'm so grateful to be able to be in a position to do it now, rather than some future lifetime may be coming back to it. So I urge you to be brave, to walk right in, and eventually your practice will become joyful. It will become peaceful. And you will become more and more free. That promise will be reached. So thank you for listening. We'll stop now and recite the 4 vows.